Hello friends, welcome back to House of Props. I'm Buddy, and this week I'm adding more to the Cyberpunk collection, specifically this variant on the Militech Saratoga. Plus, I found a really cost-effective way of applying texture to your 3D prints. Let me show you what I mean, so let's head to the shop and get started. I've printed all the pieces, and the stats I use are listed in the below description. I'm pretty happy with the print quality. They've come out pretty clean, so I'm able to jump straight to some 220 grit and begin removing the print lines. Even though they printed really smooth, the print layer lines will be visible if they're not addressed at this beginning stage, so for truly clean looking prints, some sanding is to be expected. With all the pieces sanded, assembly can begin. The first thing is this bolt handle needs to be inserted into the first body piece, and to keep it from rattling around, I'm fixing it in place with some E6000. I just squeeze a little bit into the channel and then slide in the bolt. I've applied a drop of CA glue to hold it in place while the E6000 dries, and I'm just curing that with some zip kicker so I can proceed. The next body piece will slide on like this, but first I'm going to add the supports. The prints have two holes for those, and for mine I'm using two pieces of 1/4 inch dowel. I've squeezed some E6000 into the opening and pressed the dowels all the way in. I've purposely designed them to be tight in order to avoid unnecessary shifting. Then the next body piece can be slid onto the dowels, but you want to add the E6000 to its holes before you do. Before pressing the pieces fully together, I squeeze some CA glue onto the flat surfaces that will touch, and then press them together the rest of the way. There's a bit of a gap happening up top where apparently I've had some warping happen because we've been cold here, so I'm making sure the bottom edge is aligned and straight before curing the CA glue instantly with a zip kicker. The next body piece is prepped with the E6000, and I'm adding the CA glue to the flat surface. The body is added and set with zip kicker. Even though CA glue cures faster than E6000, it still takes a little time, and instead of holding it in place and waiting, by using a couple of drops of zip kicker, it sets the CA glue in like a second, and I can proceed with the build. Now would be a great time for you to click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you never miss a project. Thank you. Now I'm going to assemble the grip and clip area. These pieces are designed to lock into each other, so I'm applying some E6000 to the opening here and some CA onto these surfaces on the grip. Then the bit that sticks out of the grip slips into the slot just like this. Before I cure the glue, I want to do a test fit on the body to make sure that everything aligns, and once I'm happy with it, I can cure the CA glue. On the grip, I apply a generous amount of CA glue and insert two small pieces of dowel like this. Now, this peg has a hole in it so that when inserted into the opening in the grip, the glue can slip into the holes and effectively lock it in place. The entire thing can be slipped onto the bottom of the unit and have the glue cured. Next up is the foregrip, and this is attached so the front nozzle end is flush. That means a slight gap will appear where the foregrip touches the grip unit, and this is perfect because the foregrip is meant to look like it is hinged and can move, even though it won't. The muzzle is glued into its opening on the front, and it essentially locks the body and the foregrip together. The mag is inserted and glued into its opening in the grip unit. Now to apply the sights. This piece has a wedge in the circle. This wedge has a straight side, and this you want to face away from you when you hold the Saratoga. And the sight slips onto the top and slides down the grooves on either side of the body. It's a tight fit, and you want the sight to ideally be about 1 inch to 1.5 inches away from the front edge. The rear sight is two pieces, and they slip into the grooves toward the back of the gun just behind the bar details on the top. Then glue the pieces to each other but not to the top of the gun. The mag release buttons are added to each side like so. And the stock has its support added between the two pieces, and just like the body, I've used E6000 and CA glue. Now the stock attaches to the body at this hinge, but I'm going to do that a little later on in the process. Now time for some cleanup. Remember this warping gap I have on the top of the body? Since it's a decent size, I don't want to rely on filler putty, so I'm going to weld some scrap filament into it. Using a flat tip on my wood burner, I heat up the plastic, and then lay in a piece of the filament. Using the wood burner, I then blend the filament into the body. This process does create fumes, so wear your PPE and work in a well-ventilated space. Alright, the gap is filled, and to even off the weld, I'm using some 180 grit sandpaper. It seems that the plastic gets harder when you weld, which is why I'm using a larger grit to rough it up and even it off. To fill the seams between the pieces, I like to use this glazing and spot putty. Now, with the Saratoga, I need to pay attention because some seams are filled and others are meant to remain open. To apply the putty, I use a flexible metal palette knife and smear and press the putty into and on the seam. This will push it into the gap and fill it. I'm also applying it thick because the putty shrinks a little as it dries, which means it can split back open, so thicker is better. Once it's dry, which can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour later depending on the humidity in the air, I even it off with the 180 grit. This step is messy, which is why I've laid down a scrap piece of paper to catch the debris. Once it's all evened off, I apply a mixture of the putty mixed with acetone. This will help fill in any hairline grooves that are still on the surface that may not be felt but will be noticeable when painted. And I'm making sure to work it into every nook and cranny with an old paintbrush. Once that layer is dry, it can be leveled off with the 180. You'll notice as I'm sanding how it's staying behind in some very fine lines that were still present on the surface. Next up, I'm going to begin priming the pieces, and for that I'm using this 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. Since it's sandable, I'm applying 2 thick coats and let the first sit for 30 minutes before spraying the next, and the good thing about this primer is that if it drips or runs, it can be sanded smooth again. I've left the primer to completely cure overnight, and now I'm wet sanding the surface to even off the primer. I'm not going to go hog wild with this step because texture will be applied, which will hide a lot. With everything smooth, I can now give the Saratoga its base paint, which will be this gloss black. It doesn't have to be gloss black, it can be matte. I'm just using the gloss since it's cheap, and at the time it was the only thing I had in the shop, and since it's cheap and gloss, I'm building up thin layers in order to avoid drips. Okay, so after the black is fully dried, I tape off the areas that will not receive texture. To create the texture, I'm using some of this 3M 90 spray contact adhesive. Make sure the can is really shook and mixed, and then spray the surface with it. You want a spray that creates this web effect when it is sprayed, and usually spray 90s do that. As I'm spraying, I'm changing direction so the adhesive creates a more random pattern and doesn't look even. I'm going to let that dry for a bit, but first I'm using a skewer to remove where the spray is trying to bridge the gaps and spots. It happens, it's just the nature of this type of spray, but it's easily fixed. I know it looks weird right now, but trust me, when it's painted, it'll create an amazing cast metal finish. After it's sat overnight, I take some pavement gray and mix in some English ivy and campground green to create a dark gray with a green hue to it, and brush this onto the Saratoga's body. The spray adhesive is still a little sticky, but the acrylic paint will seal it so you don't feel that anymore. The parts on the body that I've left unpainted are now going to be painted with the pavement gray. On the top of the rifle, these pieces will be different, so I'm not touching those right now. Just the grips, mag, and the stock pad get the gray. Now, these areas on the top bar are getting some metallic tin pounced on like this. By applying the paint in this manner, it's a way to avoid brush marks and create a nice texture at the same time. The inside of the hinge areas get the tin as well, I almost forgot about those. At this point, I'm going to attach the stock to the body, and to do that I'm using the hinge pin caps and a 2-inch piece of 1/8 inch dowel. First, I align the body and the stock, and then slip the dowel with one of the caps on the top into the holes. Really press the cap into the hole to lock the dowel, and then insert the other cap into the bottom. And once in place, you have a working hinge. At this point, you could consider the Saratoga finished, but I want to make mine a variant, and I really like this one with the neon green graffiti on it, so that's what I'm going to do. And for that, I'm using some parakeet green and airbrushing in large areas of the color, keeping it random and uneven. Then, using this jar opener as a stencil, I spray around the edges of the larger areas to create the splotchy stippling effect like the image. While doing this, the pad will create some nice unevenness in the larger spray areas as well. Now it was time for the decals, which I had a friend print on watercolor paper. You place the decal in warm water for a few seconds and then slide the decal off the paper and onto the print surface. And I found through trial and error that tweezers can be helpful for placement of very small details. And at this point, the decals have been adhered to both sides and are completely dry. To seal the decals in place and give the gun a slight shine, I'm going to lightly spray the entire thing with this matte clear coat. I noticed the stock was too loose, so I ended up adding magnets into some openings I carved. These help hold the stock in place when it's not in the folded position. And I did end up adding some openings for the magnets into the 3D part files. And the final step was to cut and glue a piece of plastic into the rear sight. It has been cut to match the shape of the sight acrylic file. And like that, this Saratoga is finished. Here with the close-up, you can see the texture from the spray adhesive. It really creates this look of like a powdered cast metal. I really like this technique and will definitely be using it again in the future. The plain Saratoga is cool, but I'm personally glad that I added the green. It just makes the whole thing really pop and look more like the Cyberpunk world. It's definitely a cool piece to hold and feels really natural in place, and the magnets really help keep the stock in place as well. Overall, I have to say, I'm really happy with the way this project turned out. There were a few obstacles to overcome, like the warping and adding the magnets at the last minute, but even then, the final prop is fantastic. Let me know what you think, and if you want to make your own, a link to the files can be found in the description. Please give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.